To the Unlocking Power of Biochar Compost Benefits, ROI and Case Studies, featuring Russell Burnett at Rainbow Beater, who have an operating biochar facility at Hollowfresh near Mount Gambier, South Australia, and currently commissioning a 40,000 tonne per annum facility at Katunga Fresh in Northern Victoria, in partnership with Optimal Group. We've got Ryan O'Connor in biochar sales and marketing at Greenman Char, produced by the char maker at Earth Systems at Yarra Ranges Council, Listerfield Waste Transfer Site, Victoria. Also, Dan Donnelly, a seasoned golf course superintendent from North Shore Country Club, located in the northern suburbs of Chicago, US. Welcome, Dan. And Josiah Hunt, CEO at Pacific Biochar, based in Northern California's wine country, not too far from San Francisco. So a warm welcome to all of our speakers today. This is the first in our Biochar Expo 2025 webinar and podcast series, which is a pre-engagement activity leading into what is our 6th conference, being held at Southern Cross University Bulinga campus, right next to Coolangatta Airport, on June 25 and 26. The theme for the event is Circular Economy and Carbon Removal, Pathways to a Sustainable Future. And sponsorship and exhibition opportunities are available. Calls for abstracts remain open until April 11, and early bird registrations until May 23. We will announce the full program in early May. Our 2 international keynote speakers are Morten Heik, Vice Chair of Pyrolyse Denmark and in Business Development at Stysdal, a biochar tech company that pyrolyses digestate from anaerobic digestion, who will talk about Denmark's 1.35 billion euro pyrolysis strategy, the largest investment into biochar by any government to date worldwide. And Tom Marrero, Secretary at the US Biochar Coalition and President at Wakefield Biochar, the highest US biochar producer on the Engineered Carbon Dioxide Removal CDR leaderboard. This is a voluntary international marketplace where some of the early buyers include Microsoft, Google, Shell, Boston Consulting Group, JP Morgan Chase, Swiss Re, and NASDAQ. So biochar has dominated this space, with over 90% of all engineered CDR credits being sold in 2023, but this dropped slightly in 2024 to 83%, and the most likely reason is a bottleneck in market development. We need to find a home for the biochar as a commodity. And that brings me to today's webinar, which is a collaboration by Australian Organics Recycling Association, AORA, and ANZ Biochar Industry Group and ANZBIG. We do aim to finish up within the hour, depending on how many questions we get from our audience today. So please go to the Q&A panel to ask a question of our experts, and we will try to get to that at the end of our panel discussion. So just an overview of the webinar. This joint webinar will bring together AORA and ANZBIG to highlight synergistic potential of biochar and compost. The focus will be on delivering practical insights for farmers, compost producers, and other partners to improve soil health, boost crop yields, and deliver measurable return on investment. The session will feature real-world case studies from ANZBIG's Farmer's Guide and proven methodologies for integrating biochar into composting systems. You can download a free copy of our biochar compost fact sheet at anzbig.org/resources, and more information on some of the case studies that we will talk to today, and numerous other applications and markets for biochar. You can download our Farmer's Guide to biochar on our website. So first up, we'll just have some opening remarks from AORA and ANZBIG representatives. So we've got John McHugh, CEO of AORA, and Melissa Rebick, Chair of ANZBIG, and she's also in Business Development at Metamorph Engineering. a gold sponsor of the Biochar Expo 2025. So, and then we'll come and have brief introductions to our speakers and their expertise. So over to you, John, just to say a few words on behalf of AORA.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Don. It's a great pleasure to be partnering with ANZ Biochar from John McHugh and AORA's perspective. Late last year, AORA, the Australian Organics Recycling Association, and ANZ Biochar entered into an MOU to work more closely together to be able to further the interests of both our industries, as Don said, in a very close and collaborative way. Some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, in fact, many of the challenges and opportunities that both our industries face are very similar. It makes sense that we come together and work very closely together, particularly with the synergistic products of compost and biochar. I'd like to thank Don for attending our members forum last week in Melbourne and doing a presentation, which was very widely received well. And it was really interesting. Don had his presentation. We had a number of presentations on the day. Don wasn't around for the last part of the day where we had a composter workshop talking about market development opportunities for compost. And what actually happened is after Don's presentation, it was almost like the door had opened or the window had been lifted up for composters who obviously know about biochar. But all of a sudden, when we started talking about market opportunities and where we see compost and where the opportunities sit for compost, all of a sudden biochar was front and centre sitting with compost. So it was really interesting to see that development in thinking by composters to say, hey, here is another industry very similar to ours, slightly different product, but there is opportunities for us to work together. So I think that was a really important outcome to see that composters all of a sudden are thinking about biochar now as an option for them for blending with compost, which we know is a really solid application product, and starting to think about biochar as perhaps something that they can think about in terms of dealing with some of the issues we have in our industry, like oversize. What do we do with the oversized fragments, in the composting process? Maybe biochar is an opportunity there, and then using that biochar to value add into the compost product and the industry. So look, I think the focus today on farmers, soil health is a really important one. That's front and centre for our industry in terms of compost. So once again, we can see these synergies and this collaboration coming together. And I'd like to think, as time passes, and this is the start of that collaboration in many respects, or last week was with Don, we will see greater opportunities for us to work together as industries, which I think is really important, but also as products which have, a remarkable, I suppose, features and benefits for farmers, for agriculture and beyond. So I think this is really exciting times for both biochar and for compost. As part of the MOU, we're going to be working, collaborating with ANZ Biochar in your conference and likewise at our conference. Just to finish up, Don, a little bit of a plug for the AORA annual conference, which will be 3rd to 5 of June, 3 to 5 of June, and that's going to be held in Newcastle, New South Wales this year. But look, hats off, congratulations. This is a great initiative today. And as I said, AORA is delighted to be working more closely with your industry because we can see a great future in collaboration and, working closely to solve some of the world's problems that we know we can solve with compost and biochar.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, John. Yes. Makes so much sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And I was happy to have Ryan and Russell at the members forum, AORA members forum last week as well. So hopefully there was some good talks going on there and synergies and perhaps some biochar being sold to composters. So yeah. Over to you, Melissa, to say a few words for ANZBIG.
Thanks, Don, and thanks to our speakers and everybody for being here. It's a great turnout and for putting this on. So I just want to talk about the why. So we know that there is at least 50 million metric tonnes of available biomass in Australia that would ordinarily produce greenhouse emissions. ANZBIG recognises the enormous potential of this to produce biochar, approximately 12 million tonnes per annum of biochar, 300 million gigajoules of energy, which we forget about. We often think when we talk about biochar, but in the process of making it, we produce energy or renewable fuels to the equivalent of 300 million gigajoules. We also will remove 20 to 30 million metric tonnes of carbon for Australia. That is our value proposition. But on top of that, the applications of biochar are astronomical. Biochar and compost is just one of those, which is very important. But at the same time, there's water savings, increasing in agricultural productivity, improving in soil health and carbon, and also the use of biochar for the industrial industry to decarbonise. We could have another whole webinar on the PFAS opportunities with biochar and compost. So just to go then to who we are, we've developed and launched a biochar industry roadmap that outlines the actions needed to achieve our aims to make this biochar renewable energy and carbon removal. We're already doing that as we're growing rapidly. Our industry group of over 200 members is growing. We've got a very experienced board of 10 plus 6 working groups and 70 volunteers that are working tirelessly to support Australia and New Zealand to achieve our roadmap outcomes. Our business plan aims to attract funds needed to work with and empower a large range of stakeholders, including our participants that are here today across the value chain. And with our working group support, we're currently already working on biochar certification schemes, ACCU methods, national and state policy advocacy, and policy changes needed for this industry, including climate change, circular economy, waste codes. Our working groups are focused on innovation, research, leverage, and marketing and communications. So our conference that Don's outlined will drill down more on our industry's multiple value propositions that we've outlined, and the biochar compost will cover an element of that today, and there'll be more opportunities at the conference. No other industry can achieve what ANZBIG can. This is why our memberships are growing, as we realise how our industry aligns with so many others to support decarbonising while increasing revenue. This important webinar on biochar and compost is one example, and I hand it over back to our speakers and back to you, Don. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, great to have you as our chair, and you'll be at the conference, obviously, giving the opening address there. So, Russell, I'll go to you first to introduce yourself quickly and just your expertise.
Okay, thanks, Don, and thanks, Melissa and everybody. I've been involved with biochar since probably the first International Biochar Conference in Australia, probably the second in the world, at Terrigal 2007. And at that meeting, I struck up a relationship with Peter Burgess and Ian Stanley, who are principal owners and operators and controllers of Rainbow Biochar Group. I also developed biochar technology over the journey and was lucky to do a lot of small facilities around the world and work in conjunction with Stephen Joseph on batch pyrolyzers and open trough pyrolyzers. Along my journey, I had a strong association with an organisation which is now folded, was around about 12% of the Australian poultry industry, and that was based at Bendigo in central Victoria, and that organisation was called the Northern. So I concentrated in my pyrolysis journey and my biochar journey on that nutrient-rich broiler bedding and manure that comes out of a chicken broiler shed, so poultry litter. So I had the advantage of a very high nutrient raw material. I also had a strong association with a composting company just out of Bendigo at a little place called Elmore. And that is a company called Elmore Compost and Organics, and that was operated by Frank and Liz Harney. So I had hands-on experience with doing compost. My experience with compost and biochar is centered on poultry litter and poultry manure. And we actually had a small production line for producing a biochar zeolite poultry manure compost. Very, very rich, very strong, and very dense composted material. And we had wonderful results through, especially on brassicas, where you could grow broccoli, cauliflowers, with far less nutrients, but with the same yield and less pest intervention. We did, which is pretty critical with broccoli because that's one of the highest pesticide vegetables out there in terms of its susceptibility to pests. One of the impositions of getting that product out into the workplace is that I could get no further than the home gardener. To get it out to farmers, too expensive. Why? Biochar in a small pyrolysis system is expensive, $1,000 a tonne. You put that into a compost material blend, you're looking at 10 to 20% biochar. It just kicks up the price as a raw biochar compost that can go to. Is my video still working?
Yes, it is, Russell. Look, thank you for that. We might come to the more detail stuff a bit later, but thank you for that background. It was very interesting. Ryan O'Connor from Greenman Char. Can you just introduce yourself quickly and your background? You there, Ryan?
Yep, I'm here, sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm part of Greenman Char, which is a part of a larger company called Earth Systems, a sign or an environmental consultancy company. My background is in horticulture, large-scale potted horticulture. I did that for 23 years as a grower and a manager of large wholesale nurseries. Came across biochar through the journey, and the more I used it, the more I fell in love with it, and the opportunity came up to run our own facility in Listerfield in conjunction with the Yarra Ranges Council and produce char along with making pyrolysis plants, another thing the company does. So I jumped on board and I'm glad to be here.
Right. All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Ryan. And Dan Donnelly.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Dan Donnelly, and I'm at North Shore Country Club, about 20 miles north of Chicago. I've been there my entire life. I just turned 65, so it's a long time for me. But it kind of taught me some long-term lessons and the importance of sustainability. And I've enjoyed working with compost since the early 80s, everything from divot mix to disease suppression through top dressing. Worked a lot with biosolids. And then we built New Greens 8 years ago, and that kind of drove me to deep biochar and using both biochar with compost and pre-treating biochar with various amendments and inoculum to see what we can develop as far as disease suppressiveness.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, Dan. And Josiah, you there with us? Josiah was out in the field.
Yes, I'm here.
Hello.
All right.
Hi, Josiah. Quick introduction, please.
Josiah Hunt, CEO of Pacific Biochar Benefit Corporation. We're based in California. Our focus has been to provide modifications to existing infrastructure, primarily biomass power plants that have the capacity to produce biochar. We help make it a profitable venture for them to consider modifying their practices to include biochar. I've been doing this since 2009. It's been an effort, and then around 2014-15 started working with biomass power plants to achieve that, as it can achieve pretty large scale production. ultimately, the whole thing, you know, you can only get so far with altruism, right? There's a lot of great ideas, a lot of great things that biochar can do, but until you can get a return on investment, it's hard to get a lot of momentum with important partners. And, you know, the critical moment, the inflection point for that was in around 2020 when we began to be able to have financial reward for climate mitigation services provided. So for carbon sequestration, carbon removal, as it's called now. And so now we can generate carbon removal credits to produce biochar and put it in the ground, sequestering carbon. And that's what drives the whole big thing. Yeah, I could say a lot more. Compost has been a major part of what we do, so I can speak quite a bit to that when we get into the details.
Yes, we'll come to your 6-year trial in vineyards, biochar compost specifically in vineyards. We can talk to that as we come back to you. So thanks so much for joining us today, Josiah, and all our speakers. So look, just first up, when we talk about the science and synergy of biochar compost, why combine biochar and compost? So the literature says, and the experience is saying, that biochar enhances compost's water retention, nutrient efficiency, and microbial activity. Biochar, as you've alluded to, Josiah, locks in carbon, contributing to carbon sequestration and reducing nutrient leaching, which is also really important. This is circular economy. It's turning organic waste, like what AORA does, into a high-value soil amendment that regenerates soil and reduces waste. So my first question to the panel is, I guess, given the proven benefits of combining biochar and compost, such as enhanced water retention, nutrient efficiency, carbon sequestration, what insights or case studies can you share that demonstrate the best return on investment for farmers, land managers, or commercial composting operations? And second part of the question is, have you seen biochar compost integration drive measurable improvements in soil health and sustainability? Russell Burnett, can you go first? And you may have alluded to some of this in your introduction there.
Yeah, sorry for probably going a bit too extensive in terms of my introduction, but in my experience, it's certainly who's going to adopt it, and I think it's really horticulture. Be interested to see what Ryan talks about that, because he's a horticulturalist. My experience is certainly in small scale deployment of what products we were making, and certainly brassicas in particular will get fantastic yields using only really probably 10% of the nutrients that farmers would conventionally put on in terms of a soluble fertilizer. So there's an enormous capacity to supply nutrients much more efficiently through a compost biochar blend when you incorporate a high nutrient component like a manure or a digestate. And I guess the impedance to deploying these products is getting the price of biochar down to a level around about that $200 to $300 a tonne, so the composters can do that work and have a product that farmers will gladly pick up.
Yeah. Okay, great. Ryan, can you speak to this question? You there, Ryan? You're on mute.
Yeah, so my personal experiences, maybe thanks to Josiah's work, actually, we're getting quite a bit of interest and big, large-scale trials happening in viticulture now. There's some really big ones happening in Victoria. So that's Josiah's expertise, but we're talking under vine application of 2 tonne per hectare biochar to about 8 tonne per hectare compost. Now, these are very fresh. This has happened in the last 3 or 4 months, so there's no data yet. But the data that's coming from America, a lot coming from New Zealand as well, is suggesting in the range of 40% increase in yield. So it's pretty exciting in that sense. I think Russell's right. Horticulture's an area that's going to boom, and even potted horticulture. So we talk about compost. You know, a lot of people would think of compost as food waste and things like that. But when we're talking composted pine bark being the main substrate in a potting mix, just adding a little bit of biochar is showing some massive results too, which I've got some numbers to share with you guys later on today. So yeah,
All right.
everything's looking good here.
Great. All right. Fantastic. So look, we might jump to Josiah and come back to you, Dan, but we're talking about vineyards there. But Josiah, do you want to speak to this, the biochar compost in vineyards that you've done?
Yeah. Hey, biochar is ultimately it's a return on investment. That's what's going to make decisions go or not. And if biochar is going to improve your crop yield, that doesn't ensure that you're going to get a return on investment, right? Because if it takes 5 or 10 tons per hectare, whatever the metric is, if you're only getting a few $100, if you're growing wheat and you're only getting a couple $100 per hectare or per acre, a 10% or 20% yield increase is not much. It's not enough to pay for the biochar. So there's nothing magic about vineyards except for that it's a high revenue, right? And so if you're pulling in $10,000 worth of crop, a 10% yield increase, that means something. That means something significant. And so really there's nothing magic about vineyards except for in California, there's a lot of vineyards, and they have traditionally been a pretty robust market. So I just want to put that out there. And so ultimately what we're trying to solve is how can biochar become a rational investment for any particular market. And there's a lot of steps involved in that. Yeah. They can buy compost, they can buy fertilizer, they can buy all these things. Why are they going to buy biochar? And ultimately it has to pan out, and they generally have to get a return on investment, not in 50 years, not in 20 years, but you're looking at less than 10 years. They got to get a positive return on investment in, hopefully the next 5 to 7 years. And they have to have reasonable confidence that they can achieve that. So I think it's really important not to underestimate how big of a hurdle that is, that you need to be able to reasonably provide a positive return on investment, and they need to be convinced of that fact. And I know that this sounds like really elementary. I can get into the details of a lot of the results, but ultimately that's the things that we are trying to solve on a daily basis.
Yes, that's right. So we've got that case study in the Farmer's Guide. So that's now 6 years, 6-year trial in biochar compost. So we'll come back to that a bit later. But Dan Donnelly, what's the story with biochar compost in golf courses? In the Farmer's Guide, we do have a case study there. Can you talk to your experience on this topic?
So we're not growing turf to bundle and sell it. So yield is really, actually we use growth regulators to slow the growth down. But just as an example, to your guys' point, is that we use biochar mixed with vermicompost, biochar mixed with biosolids, which is a really powerful one, biochar mixed with swine compost at a 50-50. And the swine compost biochar mixture, as an example, this is a published paper, you can find it on the internet. It increased shoot length by 2 times, dry weight by 3x, and root length by 30%. So what we're really after is savings, because it's absolutely true. There's got to be a cost benefit ratio that's acceptable. Biochar is not inexpensive for us. Compost I go through 30 semi-loads of compost a year to top dress my fairways, and that's my complete fertility program. So I don't spend a other dime on fertilizer, and I get the biosolids free. but I'm fortunate to be close enough to Chicago to get access to it, and they're trying to find a home for it. So you kind of each case is an individual case based on availability and how close these materials are to you, it seems. And we're more after, like you said, trying to grow turf more sustainably, reducing inputs, including water quality. I think biochar has a role to play with water quality, and of course disease suppression. And that's what really turns me on with biochar, probably more than anything. Not only its water nutrient holding capacity, but what does it do to the biology? Can we prime biochar and use it as a transporting agent to inoculate the soils with some of these known microbes, or better yet, community of microorganisms that foster overall turf health, vigor, and disease suppression?
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. And I was looking at the presentation you did for the IBI some years back. There's a lot of golf course land in the US. Can you how does that compare to the farming land? This is a big opportunity, isn't it?
Well, for lawns, so lawns are huge. It's the third, most grown crop, so to speak, in our country. So I mean, lawns, golf courses in general. So most golf courses are managed at a very high level with tight budgets and that. So there's a lot of room for growth with homeowners, for example, and especially do-it-yourselfers to try to improve our environment, try to utilize some of these waste streams and capitalize on the circular economy concept.
Yeah. So look, talking further, I guess, about this business case for biochar compost, with increased yields, cost efficiency, so reduced costs going into the crop, and also the carbon credits and the potential revenue there. Maybe we'll go back to you again, just so given the carbon credit revenue, and I think you're second on the second US biochar producer on the CDR leaderboard. Correct me if I'm wrong. Can you what are the key financial consideration businesses should evaluate when adopting biochar compost? And if you can just share specific case studies, that'd be great.
Yeah. My whole biochar career started actually with a biochar compost grant research project in 2009. Under the premise that biochar alone is great, but biochar in compost, if you can put biochar in the early stage of compost, it can improve the qualities of biochar to dramatically increase the immediate impact of that material. And it can conversely also improve the composting process. It's something I've been doing for, getting close to 20 years now. But just because biochar, and it's been shown that biochar can improve the composting process, right? It can marginally improve the rate at which it composts, so marginally decrease the time to hit a certain maturation point. Is that going to make the composters buy biochar? Are they going to start using biochar in the early stage compost because of a slightly faster composting rate? I don't know. Historically, no. There's a few exceptions to that. So one of the hardest things is like, how do we actually incorporate it into the system? I've worked with compost yards. For most of our biochar goes through compost yards. I'd say the vast majority of it goes through compost yards one way or another. But most of that is just because of shared equipment. Compost yards are located in a lot of the important agricultural zones, and they have all the right equipment. So we land raw trucks of biochar there, and then most of the farmers that are using biochar are probably also using compost. So it makes a lot of sense that we land the material there, it gets blended with the compost, and then delivered to field and then applied in one pass. So just strictly from a distribution efficiency pathway, we work with compost yards. But generally, it's driven by the consumer. The farmer decides. The farmer is going to decide whether biochar is going to land at that compost yard or not. How can we get compost yards to incorporate biochar? And this is a really important one. there has to be an economic incentive. It has to be a clear economic incentive. It's not like compost yards have huge amounts of money to throw around and try all kinds of different stuff. So there has to be a clear economic incentive. One of the things that we've been working on is helping answer that question. Biochar can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from composting process by a significant margin. Composting itself is reducing what would have happened otherwise, right? And so if you took all that, waste organic matter and did nothing with it, the methane and nitrous oxide emissions would be very large. But if you compost that material, they're significantly reduced, profoundly reduced, but there's still some greenhouse gas emissions of even a good composting process. And when you add a reasonable amount of biochar to the early stage compost, you can dramatically reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So we've been trying to develop a method that the compost producers can actually get credited for greenhouse gas emissions when biochar is used on the front end of composting, as a way to help really get the whole thing going. Because I've been working at this for like 20 years and it's hard. I don't know how to do it, because it's hard enough to get people to buy compost. To get people to buy biochar is another thing. To get them to buy a biochar and compost, or to buy a biochar plus, it's difficult. And I don't want to belittle how difficult it is actually to cause change within these very large systems. And there has to be return on investment. And so for ease of efficiency, we've gotten biochar landing at compost yards and blended with finished compost before delivery. That's a majority of our materials going out in some form or another like that. How do we get biochar incorporated into the composting process and get the maximum benefit, thereby improving the characteristics of the biochar and benefiting the composting process? I don't know. There's a few exceptions. We have one compost yard that we've worked with for 10 years now, and they have seen the benefits of compost in reducing the chance of having off piles that just kind of go dead because it got too much rain or whatever reasons. Sometimes piles can kind of go dead and then they get like this really extended timeline to maturation. It reduces risk, and it just kind of generally improves the process and kind of gets a better result. We have one compost yard that's kind of sold on it only when it's super duper cheap and easy. But other than that, it's a really hard lift. So I'm kind of putting this as a call to action. In order to get a methodology, in order to get revenue for greenhouse gas emissions reduced when biochar is used in compost, it needs to be a predictive methodology. If you have to measure the methane emissions or the nitrous oxide or both, the greenhouse gas emissions of the compost pile by pile, it will not pencil out. So one way to do it would be to do just extensive, exhaustive replicated trials where you put a certain type of biochar within a range of characteristics, with a certain type of composting within a limited range of characteristics, at only a couple different rates, limited range of application rate, and do exhaustive replicates again and again and again and again and again and again until you can have an outcome with a standard deviation to a limited degree, thereby allowing you to make a statement that says when X, when biochar of certain characteristics is used in compost of certain characteristics at an application rate no less than some amount, the predicted greenhouse gas emission outcome is this. And the numbers, I've modeled it, the numbers are not small for every 1 ton of biochar. I think it's very achievable. I think it's actually conservative to say that we can reduce the CO2 equivalent of methane and nitrous oxide by roughly 3 tons CO2 equivalent per 1 ton biochar, or even greater. But there has to be a predictive methodology that would allow this to be rigorously assessed and accepted, so that they could get paid for that. And so I'm putting out there as a call of action from somebody that's been working on this for a long time. That's one of the things that we've identified as a high priority that we've been working on. I think it's very achievable, but it's going to take upfront work and potentially a lot of collaboration amongst compost producers and biochar producers to generate such a database that could allow for that.
Yes. Okay. Yes. All right. Great point. Emissions reduction, and as well as that carbon removal from biochar. Look, we've got quite a number of questions, and I'm aware of time, but we've got a number of case studies in our farmer's guide. and you know, one of them is your study on the in the vineyard. That's a 6-year biochar compost. You've got the results. The results in the Farmer's Guide said, when it was written anyway, was improved vine growth, 20% higher yield and better water use efficiency. We also had another case study in the Farmer's Guide, which was actually to do with a rooftop garden. So that was very interesting. That showed enhanced water retention, nutrient availability and runoff quality in green roofs and urban gardens. Ryan, I'm not sure if you can talk to this, but I do understand that Greenman Char supplied the biochar there for the roof garden at the University of Melbourne. Are you able to talk to that at all?
Well, we did supply that. That was before my time, but as we know, biochar it's perfect for roof gardens or walls.
Yeah.
It's because of its light, and it lasts as well. So that one of the things I've been doing is trials with wicking beds, and amazingly, one of them is 100%, well, not 100%, 99.5% biochar, 300 litres of it as the growing media. Wood vinegar, bit of wood vinegar and insect manure as the nutrient. And it's growing crops better than a commercial grade wicking bed potting mix. So there's and the thing that interests me mostly about the biochar as a media, a growing media, is its stability and longevity. So obviously biochar is going to last for our lifetime and many more, but as you can just continually grow crops in it, as long as you're adding some nutrient and it doesn't degrade anywhere near as quick as composted bark. So that's something something we've worked on, and it saves money because of its longevity.
That's right. Yeah, it's a huge another big market for smart cities. Biochar as a substrate in roof gardens. So there's an example there on the fact sheet, and in our Farmer's Guide that was in Portland, US. They integrated 7% biochar into rooftop soil beds, and the increased water retention up to 100%, they said, improved nutrient cycling, reduced runoff pollution, etc., and enhanced fire resistance in urban green spaces. So that's very interesting as well. Now, we've got so many questions that have come through, so I think we might go to those, and that will open it up to the other speakers as well. So I guess just if someone wants to answer a question, we just jump in. But the first question is from Dante Brahm. Has any of the speakers been involved with using biochar conditioning of soils in establishing a major plantation that would generate renewable fuel? Has anyone been involved in establishment of plantations at all here? Or can anyone speak to that? Melissa?
I think, the question's quite complex, but it's, it's about the whole circular economy, like making biochar, I understand, and then using it back on plantations. And certainly there's a lot of case studies with the use of biochar and compost in horticultural situations, and there's a meta-analysis of the use of biochar in forests as well as for horticulture. And there's another meta-analysis on biochar and its use in soils. So I think there's enough published evidence of the benefits to plantations. I think what we know about horticulture is that biochar is generally used, with compost or the likes of manure, and then placed it works best if it's placed beneath the roots of the trees. Now, if you've already got an established plantation, you need to work out how else to get it in. So that could be next to the rows, but making sure that somehow that biochar can be accessible by the roots, you're going to get much better benefit. There's some recommended application rates in the farmer's guide, but from my understanding, your biochar compost combination should be no more than 20% of the soil volume, so that and then you combine that in with the soil. So
okay,
I'll just leave it at that. But all those other benefits. I think the plantation's benefit as well is the fruiting benefits. Over and over again, it says how there's more fruit, bigger fruit, and also the fruit often is sweeter, giving a higher value.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Melissa. Look, Tim Charlton, can you explain how to add biochar compost mix as a do-it-yourself homeowner to a lawn?
Great question. As a pre-plant, of course, it's an easy thing to till in. I agree that our results is anywhere between 10 to 20%, even as low as 5%, depending on the char and the desired outcome. So you don't need a lot, and that's by volume, and that's using sand. And our experience is sand is pretty improved. So if you have a fairly decent soil to begin with, you could probably err on the lower side. And or through top dressing. And I would probably cut it with a little bit of sand or topsoil. I wouldn't use straight char. We use straight compost, but compost plus biochar, I would probably throw a stab at 10% biochar, 90% compost type top dressing. Again, depending on what your goal is and what your situation is. And top dress it and just use a leaf rake to work it in. We use a piece of chain link fence dragged behind a truckster, and just work it into the turf that way.
Yeah, that's great. And how long have you been using biochar on golf courses now?
10 years.
10 years. Okay. So
we focus because it's so expensive for us to get it. We focus it primarily on the putting greens.
Yeah.
So it's a medium.
Yeah. Okay, great. Ryan, I think you got some biochar into the Kew golf course, was it? And they did. They successfully used it in the underlay. But also, could you talk to your interesting concept of getting it into the bunker sand buckets?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Dan, maybe Dan has done it, but we've got I've got a golf course near my part of the world that's happy to give me an area to trial using biochar in different rates mixed with sand for the divot repair sand. Haven't started, but I think there is studies out there. It has been done before that it obviously speeds up the repair of the divot. I'm looking forward to doing it. But yeah, Q have used it before they're rolling on some new turf. They've got some really. They're on the side of the Yarra River. They get badly flooded, so they're trialing all sorts of things. And one was a biochar underlay around their greens, not on the green, but just around the fairway near the greens. And he's a believer, a new superintendent there, and I think that sometimes that's what it takes. There's some fresh energy in places like that. So I continue to work with him, and we've developed a guide for golf courses. The Green Man actually has its own golf course guide, which I could share with you, Don.
We can pass that on. Yeah, for sure.
That's one of the areas I'm working in because I like visiting golf courses, and it is a market. It's an untapped market, effectively in Australia.
Yeah, and huge tracts of land that could be carbon sinks and friendly ecosystems as well. So,
formal study by the Chicago District Golf Association, Dr. Derek Settle, who actually did test some of those things, Ryan, and the compost mixtures did grow grass much quicker and more efficiently, especially during midsummer when things can dry out pretty quick.
Yeah.
there is some equipment. I bought one, or the club bought one I work at, but it's north of $100,000, so it's not inexpensive. But
Yeah.
there's sand inject systems that do take these mixtures and directly inject it into the surface of the soil, and that's how we
Wow.
incorporate it in our greens. But that's
Yeah.
that's special.
Yeah. Russell, we've had a question about using cattle manure, blending with biochar. Now I don't know if you've got experience in that, but maybe you talk to manure, chicken manure. Can you talk a bit more to your experience with the chicken manure?
Yeah, certainly. Interesting about that. We'll probably be doing a large scale trial at Katanga through late 2025 into 2026. We've got access to about, I suppose, 10,000 cubic meters of cattle manure from a feedlot enterprise, and we'll be combining that with biochar there. So yes, we'll be doing some large scale trials with that product. And cattle manure is an interesting one. It's not a high nitrogen or phosphorus one, but it's certainly got a lot of fibrous material. It would make a great combination with biochar. It would be very successful, is my valuation of it. So if anyone has got access to cow manure and combine it with biochar, actually, Melissa's probably done as much work as anyone. You were feeding cows with biochar. What was the end result from the cow manure coming out of that livestock, Melissa?
Yeah, look, I did a couple of trials feeding biochar through dairy cows, and the result was an increase in milk yield and a whole range of other things, but the manure itself was higher in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So while the cows benefited, the manure was much higher, and it was like this bioactive spreadable manure when you feed it through an animal. I did a subsequent study. It was a replicated trial where we actually just mixed biochar in with the manure rather than it going through the animal. Then that manure was buried by dung beetles, and we found, dung beetles are very good at improving soil health and soil carbon, but the combination of biochar in with the manure at very low rates increased statistically significantly a whole range of things, including soil carbon, microbes, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, the range of microbes, mycorrhizae fungi. It was statistical significance and by a factor, 3 to 4-fold over and above just manure being buried by dung beetles. So that biochar had so much benefit that you can mix it with manures, but if you can feed it through an animal, you achieve animal increase in health as well as increase in production, and then the soil health benefits.
Yeah. And it's amazing to compare a raw biochar with a biochar that's been interacted with animals or compost or soil. So yeah, it's absorbing and adsorbing to the surface of the biochar. So Josiah, thank you. Back over to you. What is the ETA for conclusions being drawn on greenhouse reduction and released?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What is the ETA for conclusions being drawn on G8 and the greenhouse gas reduction and released?
When biochar is used in compost?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of research articles published on it, and the range is generally between like 30% and 80% reduction in methane emissions. That's profound, right?
Yeah.
30 to 80% reduction in methane emissions.
Yeah.
When biochar is included in early stage compost.
Yeah.
And so a 30 to 80% reduction in methane emissions, like that, what does that mean? And that's why we took it a step further and tried modeling it out. Like, all right, how much methane emissions are there from compost? And with a given application and a biochar to said compost, what would be the outcome in tons CO2 equivalent per ton biochar? And again, this is using a 20 GWP, which a lot of standard is 100 GWP for methane, global warming potential for methane, where I think a lot of people agree that a 20 GWP is more appropriate for methane because it's a short-lived but potent greenhouse gas. So again, these numbers are based on that modeling. But it's not unheard of that you could achieve, beyond 6 tons CO2 equivalent per 1 ton biochar at a 20 GWP. But our kind of our modest, and potentially conservative estimate is that on average it's going to be about 3 point something tons CO2 equivalent per 1 ton biochar. So let's add this up. Biochar itself on its carbon, the embodied carbon of biochar, it's more pure than carbon dioxide, right? So it's about a 2.5 to 3 ton CO2 equivalent when you do a full life cycle assessment. 2.5 to 3 ton CO2 equivalent per 1 ton biochar. We can basically double that when we double it or more when we add biochar to early stage compost. And I just want to stress why this is such a thing for me. We're producing biochar is a climate change mitigation thing, right? If it wasn't, we'd still just call it charcoal. We'd still just call it horticultural charcoal. Horticultural charcoal has been around for forever, right? We've been using charcoal in soil forever. But climate change brought another element into the equation. And when biochar, when this whole thing of like sustainable procurement of biomass and clean production of biochar, and then subsequently applying it in soil as this whole chain, which can achieve a climate change mitigation outcome, became realized, like they're like, oh my God, this is so big. Charcoal can't contain this concept anymore. This needs a new word. Let's call it agrichar. And then like, oh, that's already trademarked. So now we got to call it biochar. So that's literally, from what I understand, why we even have a word biochar.
Yes.
And so if we can, now that we're getting the carbon credit revenue, that's what's driving the whole ship right now. I mean, it's not ag sales. We survived meager existence on ag sales, but it's it's the climate change mitigation that's driving our business right now. We have more biochar than we can sell, and I don't care. That's fine. We just give it away. Newsbreak, we're giving away biochar. We are literally just delivering biochar to local farmland free of charge, because the carbon credits are what this is about. This is about this is a climate change mitigation game. And if we could drive it a little bit further, we could deliver it to compost yards that would probably be willing to accept the material for free. But it's that marginal difference between delivering it to a local farmland, like a really local farmland, for $500-600 a truck, or delivering it to the nearest compost yard, which is maybe $1,000 to $1,200 a truck. Right? That marginal difference of a couple $100 per truckload of biochar, who's going to pay for that? And how? And this is why I'm so hot on this concept of, if the compost yards can get paid for using biochar, because we know it has a lot of benefits, but who's going to pay them for that? Are the farmers going to pay it for them? Pay them for that? I don't know. That's a really hard one. I've been working on that for a long time. The greenhouse gas emission reduction benefits of utilizing biochar in early stage compost, I believe, is an untapped, is this thing that we've all acknowledged but never been able to create a financial reward for achieving. And that small amount could make the difference between whether we distribute it locally for $500 or $600 a truck, or send it to a compost yard. That extra couple, who's going to pay for that? And if we can figure that out, we've basically doubled the climate impact of what we're doing.
Transport.
And all the downstream benefits that all the people that are using that that are using that compost are going to have improved results from the utilization of that compost.
Sorry.
So I'm sorry. I just really wanted to. This to me is like what I've been excited about it for a long time, and I'm just amped on it right now. I really want to see this get done.
That's great.
Sorry.
Go for it, Russell.
Sorry to butt in.
Thanks.
Josiah, that is huge. If we can double the carbon credits or corks per ton of biochar produced, that's massive. That's a spin-off for everybody, especially the compost and the producer.
To be clear,
is there any quantifiable data?
The embodied carbon of the biochar is a carbon dioxide removal. That is a durable carbon removal credit, and those have a particular value. The emission reduction when biochar is used in compost is not a carbon removal. That's an emission reduction. That's a different class of credit. So it wouldn't necessarily double. It would be a stacked. It'd be we have the biochar carbon removal, And then we have this other thing happening over here too. They're slightly different units, but from the climate's perspective, we'd be doubling the impact, but they are distinct units. I just want to be sure.
Yeah.
Because we can get like $150 or above even per unit of carbon dioxide removal. But for the emission reduction, when we're reducing methane emissions from compost, I don't think we're looking at 150. I think we're looking at maybe $30 or something per ton CO2. But still, that's enough to make that marginal difference per truckload of shipping.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to add on top of that the soil carbon increase, which there are lots of papers on, and the one that Stephen Joseph did on how biochar works and when it doesn't, talks about the positive and negative primary effect of carbon in the soil on top of the carbon already in the char. And so that ranges from, you know, from 3 to 50% increase over a period of time. So there's that. So there's lots of pluses, you know, for biochar and compost together.
Yeah. And in our roadmap, and you know, we have identified, Melissa, that you've talked to 12 to 50% reduction in greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide, you know, released from ag soils as well. So yeah. But look, I think unfortunately we've come to the end of our time. I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer, but before we sign off, is there any final comments from any of our speakers or other panelists today?
I better jump in and just say we can't give it away. There's no free biochar in Australia, but we're trying to produce it efficiently and on enough scale where the price becomes more attractive. So it's not free. So I don't want any emails asking for freebies.
I think it might be worthwhile just going around and getting closing comments from everybody. Just a couple of things for me. I think the properties of char is really important, and that can change with the temperature of the pyrolysis. So the carbon content, the porosity, the charge, and the surface area. And you know, as you push the temperature up, your carbon content increases, and so but the available carbon doesn't, and so that it varies in terms of how it works with compost, and it's really important. But all those properties are what makes it special and highly valued. Okay. I think the value of biochar can change depending on what you're producing it with. So you know, there's some that, you know, as production increases, the biochar price can go down. But if you're selling biochar and compost together, it value adds, and it's a supercharged compost, which, you know, potentially could be sold at lesser value depending on the cost of the biochar. So there's a couple of things for me. The other thing is the PFAS in the compost, and it's a rising concern. And there's amazing papers out now about that the adsorption potential of biochar in compost to absorb the PFAS, and so that you know, renders it ineffective. You know, it absorbs it and locks it up for centuries. The long-lasting effect of biochar in the soil as well.
And of course, the thermal treatment of the feedstock initially destroys PFAS and microplastics as well. So, which is preferable. And then, of course, not to have these things in the feedstock to begin with is even more preferable. So, but Dan, final comments from you, closing comments?
Well, yeah, as an end user, one of the things that I think we still have a ways to go, you know, the carbon credits and all that is fine. Maybe that'll help jumpstart it. But me as an end user, that doesn't really do much for me. I want to know more about the agronomic values and soil and plant health related issues. And so there's a lot to be done. Like compost went through quite a painstaking process of standardizing compost to some degree. There's a lot of variables with both these processes, making char and making compost, that needs to be worked out, in my opinion, so the end user has a better guide, if you will, on what to expect. So there's more consistency with the product and the end results ultimately. And I think that would be an important incentive as we try to move this industry forward.
Okay. John McHugh, would you like to say any final closing comments from AORA?
Thanks, Tom. No, it's been a pleasure to be part of this, and congratulations to everyone at ANZBIG Biochar for bringing this on, and great that we had some international speakers there. I look at this and all I see is wonderful opportunity, but how we actually gain traction with some of these end markets, with agriculture, with viticulture, etc., is always the hard nut to crack. It is with compost. I see the benefits. We've spoken about the benefits. They're clearly there, but that extension work, we've really got to get our head around how we can get out there and sell this message more effectively.
Yes, yeah, great. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you at the AORA conference, June 3 to 5. We'll be exhibiting there. Josiah, the closing comments from you, please.
Thank you, Don, for hosting this great event. Inspiring, thought-provoking, and bringing a lot of great people together. Sorry I can't make it to the conference, and best of luck in that being a great success. And I'm sure you'll send me pictures of firing waves. You're gonna be like, "Oh my God, the waves were so good, and you missed out."
Yeah, on a biochar surfboard.
On a biochar surfboard at that. Yeah. Great job putting this together, Don. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Josiah. So you can read more of Josiah's biochar compost trial in vineyards in Monterey. That's now a 6-year-old trial, so that's in our Farmers Guide. And Ryan, would you like to say anything before we close? Not giving away free biochar. Is Green Man or Earth Systems, have you getting registered for the biochar carbon removal credits, or?
Well, we're just going through the process, so that'll be something that happens, and hopefully our technology will be registered as well worldwide. So
okay, great.
Things happening in the background.
Wonderful. What
I will say, it makes sense. Everything makes sense. Transport, spreading, the spreadability of biochar works with compost spreaders. Everything makes sense, and it's a matter of changing the public's perception. And my job really is to make biochar more mainstream. That's the way I see my job, and make it famous. So that's what I'm working on. And I think hopefully in 10, even 5 years or 10 years, that if someone puts a plant in the ground, they know they need to put food on it, nutrient in the way of compost, needs water, and it needs its safety net of biochar as well to make everything work together. And that's where we're at the minute.
Thank you, Ryan. So doing a great job there at Green Man Char. And Russell Burnett, King of Biochar Compost in Australia, and must mention that you're a Hall of Fame award winner. We will be nominations for this year's awards are open, and we're going to be having the awards ceremony at our networking dinner on June 25. So you were an inaugural Hall of Fame winner, Russell. So final comments from you, please. And we didn't touch on wood vinegar today, really, but wood vinegar, another very interesting pyrolysis byproduct.
Thanks, Don. And firstly, I want to thank you and Melissa and all the speakers. Fantastic effort. Hey, I can see a fast-track grant application between AORA, ANZBIG, and an industry entity. We would supply the biochar. Let's get some quantifiable data on a full life cycle analysis on what happens with carbon through biochar composting process. I mean, that's an exciting project. It shouldn't take long, just a matter of putting it together.
That's right.
And also wood vinegar, pyroligneous acid, as I prefer to call it. It's a wonderful additive and a cheap additive to compost. A little bit goes a long way. Japanese have been doing it for 200 years. The Thailanders have adopted it enormously. Next chapter.
Speeds up the composting process. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Reduces odors, makes the whole process go
Yep.
hotter, and
Yep.
cleaner.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, John from AORA. Thank you, Melissa, representing ANZBIG, Russell Burnett at Rainbow Beater, Ryan O'Connor, Greenman Char, Dan Donnelly from the North Shore Country Club in Chicago, and Josiah Hunt, CEO of Pacific Biochar, close to San Francisco there in the northern suburbs of Vineyards. So yeah, wonderful information. We didn't get to all of our questions, so I do apologise to the audience. As I said, this is a primer leading into Biochar Expo 2025, being held at the Southern Cross University Balinga campus, right next to Coolangatta Airport, almost walking distance. And yeah, sponsorship and exhibition opportunities are available. AORA will be there with a stall. Our sponsors to date are gold sponsors, Rainbow Beater. So thank you, Russell. Metamorph Engineering. So thank you, Melissa. You're in business development with them. We've also got Southland Carbon as a bronze sponsor. They're a new producer in New Zealand. We've got Vital Chemical, who have very interesting hydromulch product that is used on highway stabilisation and also could be used in mining rehabilitation. Another big, huge market for biochar. And we've also got Deakin University, who will peer review our proceedings. So yeah, please do submit an abstract by April 11 or register early before May 23. So we'll look forward to catching up with you there. Also, I've shared, go to our website, anzbig.resources, for the biochar compost fact sheet. Also, under our resources tab is a link to the Farmer's Guide. If you want more information, look at some of these case studies that we've spoken about today, then you can download a copy there of the digital version, or you can purchase a paperback version as well, which is great addition to the library. Yeah, future events. This is the first of our Biochar Expo 2025 webinar and podcast series. The podcast will be uploaded next week on our Spotify and Apple podcast channels. And next month, we are going to look at biochar in water management. A hot topic at the moment, as we've discussed with the whole PFAS and microplastic issue. So that's looking at innovations for market development and circular economy outcomes. That'll be on Thursday, March 20, from 12 to 1:30. It's a little bit longer, that one. And that's for water industry professionals, utilities, engineers, planners, but also policymakers and regulators, biochar producers and researchers, and industry stakeholders in agriculture, the built environment, waste management, and urban planning. So that will be a very exciting webinar as well. So, all right. So,
and Don, I just think if anyone's not feel like they've got their question answered, please email either myself or Don at chair@anzbig.org or exec@anzbig.org. And thank you, Don, for coordinating this and all the speakers as well.
Okay. So a recording will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel after this, and as well, so you can watch a recording. So thanks again, everyone, and until next time, Charles.
Dan.